You know that sound, right? That heavy, Pacific Northwest rain hitting the roof? That was the only sound in the courtroom when the bailiff said, "All rise." It was the kind of silence that feels like pressure, like the air itself was holding its breath. And in the center of it all, in a simple blue dress that made her look about 12, sat Ilara Vance. 14 years old. Her hands were folded neatly in her lap. Her back was perfectly straight. She looked like a porcelain doll someone had placed carefully in the defendant's chair. The judge, a man named William Hawthorne with a face like weathered stone and eyes that missed nothing, read the verdict. Guilty of murder in the first degree. A gasp went through the room. Shocked cries. The sound of a journalist scrambling for a phone. And Ilara smiled. It wasn't a big smile. Not a grin. It was just a subtle, fleeting curl at the corner of her mouth. A tiny, private victory. The kind of smile you give when you've solved a difficult puzzle, or when you've gotten away with something. But here's the thing. She hadn't gotten away with anything. They'd just found her guilty. They were going to send her away for decades. And she was smiling. Every camera in the room saw it. The artists sketching, they captured it. The prosecutor froze, midway through a relieved sigh. Ilara's own defense attorney actually took a half-step back from the table, as if the smile was a physical thing, a venomous snake that had just appeared on the polished wood. The judge didn't react. He just watched her. He'd seen a lot in his 30 years on the bench. The rage, the tears, the collapse. But this cool, calm satisfaction on the face of a child who had just been convicted of shooting her own mother? He leaned forward, his voice cutting through the shocked whispers like a scalpel. "I see you, Ilara." That's all he said. 4 words. And her smile vanished. Not melted, not faded. It was erased. Replaced by a blank, cold stillness. In that instant, the little girl in the blue dress was gone, and what looked back at him was something older. And much, much colder. So how did we get here? How does a 14-year-old girl from a beautiful house in Seattle end up in a courtroom, convicted of a murder so brutal, and then smile about it? This is the story of a perfect crime. At least, it was supposed to be perfect. Ilara Vance was a genius. I don't mean she was smart. I mean her IQ was off the charts. She played Chopin at a concert level. She could debate philosophy with college professors. And she decided, with the cold logic of a chess master, that her mother was an obstacle to be removed. She planned it for months. Every detail. The alibi. The forensic countermeasures. The emotional performance she'd give as the grieving daughter. She studied police procedures. She read books on crime scene staging. She was an artist, and the canvas was the perfect murder. Her fatal flaw wasn't in her planning. It was in her belief. She was so convinced of her own superiority, so certain that no one could possibly see through the act of a heartbroken child, that she missed one crucial thing. The one piece of evidence she couldn't hide, her own reflection in the eyes of someone who knew what real evil looked like. This is the story of that arrogance. This is how a teenage girl believed she was untouchable, and how a judge with weary eyes saw right through the performance to the arrogant monster hiding behind it. But before we go back to the beginning, to that quiet house on Magnolia Lane and the first crack in Ilara's perfect world, tell me something. Where are you right now, listening to this? Is it raining where you are, like it was that night in Seattle? Or is it clear, with stars visible? Drop your city and your weather in the comments below. Let's get a sense of where this story is reaching. And if you're ready to follow this dark, twisted journey into the mind of a brilliant girl who thought she could outsmart everyone, hit subscribe. Because this isn't just a crime story. This is a story about the mirror, and what happens when the monster finally sees itself. Now, let's rewind. 6 months before that smile in the courtroom. To a seemingly ordinary house, on a seemingly ordinary street. The house on Magnolia Lane was perfect. A craftsman-style home with a wraparound porch and hydrangeas that bloomed a shocking blue every summer. It was the kind of house you'd see on a postcard. The kind of house where nothing bad could ever happen. But inside, in the quiet spaces between the piano notes and the humming of the refrigerator, Something was already rotting. Sarah Vance, Ilara's mother, was a lawyer. She built her career reading people, spotting lies in the twitch of an eye. But the one person she never thought to read was her own daughter. And Ilara? She was already at work. The blueprint was already drawn. She was just waiting for the right moment to start building her masterpiece. It all began, as these things often do, with something that looks like love. Have you ever been in a house that's too quiet? I don't mean empty. I mean quiet in a way that feels intentional. Like the silence is being enforced. That was the house on Magnolia Lane. From the outside, it was everything you'd want. A beautiful craftsman home, painted a soft gray with white trim. Hydrangeas by the porch. A wooden swing that creaked just a little in the wind. The kind of house that said, "Good things happen here. A happy family lives here." But if you stood on the porch a little too long, you'd notice things. The flower beds were weedless. Not a single dandelion. The porch was swept clean, not just of leaves, but of everything. No stray toys, no forgotten coffee mug, no mud by the doormat. It was perfect. It was a museum. Inside, the quiet was even louder. The living room was all neutral tones, beiges and grays, like it was afraid of making a statement. Books were arranged on the shelves by height, not subject. The only real color in the whole room came from the glossy black of the grand piano in the corner. And that's where we find Ilara, on a Thursday evening in October. She's at the piano, her back ruler straight, her fingers flying over the keys. The music she's playing is technically flawless. Every note is exactly where it should be. But if you listen closely, there's no feeling in it. It's like listening to a brilliant robot. The back door opens and closes. Footsteps in the kitchen. Ilara doesn't miss a note. Her mother, Sarah Vance, comes in, still in her work suit. She drops her briefcase by the sofa with a tired sigh. She watches her daughter play for a moment, and on her face is this complicated mix of pride and something else. A kind of weary distance. The song ends. The last note hangs in the silent air. "That was beautiful, honey," Sarah says. Her voice is pleasant, professional. The same voice she uses with clients. "Thank you," Ilara says, not turning around. She carefully closes the piano lid. "Mrs. Albrecht says I'm ready for the competition next month. The Brahms, not the Chopin." "That's great." Sarah is already walking toward the kitchen, unbuttoning her blazer. "I'll try to be there. The Hastings merger is eating my life, but I'll try." There's no "I promise." No, I wouldn't miss it. Just "I'll try." Ilara's expression doesn't change. She just nods, as if she expected nothing else. This was their normal. A dance of perfect politeness in a perfectly clean house. Sarah opens the refrigerator. It's full of pre-made, healthy meals in glass containers. Nothing messy. Nothing that requires a long, chaotic family dinner. She pulls out 2 containers. "Chicken and vegetables okay?" "Yes." "How was school?" "Fine. I got a 98 on the chemistry midterm." "Of course you did." And that was it. Conversation over. They ate at the breakfast bar, not the dining table. The dining table was for show. The breakfast bar was for efficiency. They didn't talk about their days. They didn't laugh. They just ate, the only sound being the clink of forks on glass. Sarah scrolled through emails on her phone. Ilara stared out the window at the gathering dusk. Here's what the perfect house didn't show you: the loneliness in it. The quiet wasn't peaceful. It was heavy. It was the sound of 2 people living in the same space, carefully orbiting each other, never touching. Sarah loved her daughter. In her own, distracted way, she truly did. She worked insane hours to give Ilara this beautiful house, the piano, the best schools. She thought that was the recipe. Provide, achieve, succeed. She never saw the hunger in Ilara for something else. For a messy, loud, real connection. And by the time Ilara stopped wanting that connection altogether, Sarah didn't notice either. After dinner, Ilara went upstairs to her room. It was just as ordered as the rest of the house. Books alphabetized. Bed made with military corners. On her desk, beside her laptop, sat a single, ordinary-looking composition notebook. This is where the blueprint was born. She opened it. The first few pages were filled with neat, analytical notes from her chemistry class. But if you flipped further, the subject changed. Phase 1, Establish Pattern of Distress, she'd written at the top of a clean page. Below, she'd made a bulleted list. Request more sessions with Dr. Evans, cite anxiety, trouble sleeping. Begin journal entries arguments with mother, keep details vague but emotional. Leave one school assignment incomplete, plausible drop in performance due to stress. It wasn't a diary. It was a project plan. Downstairs, Sarah washed the 2 containers, wiped the spotless counter again, and went to her home office to work some more. She never checked on Ilara. Ilara was the easy one. The perfect one. She didn't need checking on. That was the fatal mistake, wasn't it? Assuming that because something looks perfect, it is perfect. The house on Magnolia Lane was a stage, and Ilara was done being just an actor in her mother's play. She was writing her own script now, a much darker one, and the first act required a villain. In her story, the villain needed to be her mother. All she needed was the right motivation to make the audience, the police, the therapists, the world, believe it. She found that motivation the very next week. His name was David, and he was about to make everything so much worse, just by being a good guy. You know that feeling when you're reading a book, and you can just sense it? The page where everything is about to change. The character is happy, things are calm, and you just know the other shoe is about to drop. That was breakfast at the Vance house on a Tuesday morning in November. The rain was back, tapping against the kitchen window. Sarah was making eggs, which was unusual. She was usually rushing with a protein bar. But today, she was humming. Actually humming. Ilara watched her from the breakfast bar, her calculus textbook open but forgotten. She analyzed her mother like a scientist studies a strange new specimen. The slight smile. The relaxed shoulders. The way she plated the eggs with a little garnish of parsley, like this was a restaurant. "You're in a good mood," Ilara said, her voice flat. A statement, not a question. Sarah turned, leaning against the counter, a real, unguarded smile on her face. It transformed her. Made her look younger. For a second, Ilara saw the woman her mother must have been before the briefcases and the long hours and the heavy quiet. "I am," Sarah said. She took a breath. "Honey, there's someone I want you to meet." The air in the kitchen changed. It got thinner. Ilara didn't move. "Who?" "His name is David. He's a teacher at your school, actually. History." Ilara's brain, that brilliant, lightning-fast machine, immediately began cross-referencing. David. History department. Mr. Ridgway. Unmarried. Mid-40s. Drives a Subaru. Sponsors the debate team. Data points slotted into place. "You're dating my history teacher." Again, a statement. No emotion. "It started as coffee after a parent-teacher conference last month," Sarah said, her smile becoming a little unsure under Ilara's cold scrutiny. "He's kind and funny, and he makes me happy. We're getting serious." The word serious landed in the quiet kitchen like a stone in a still pond. Serious meant weekends. It meant him in this house. It meant shared holidays and inside jokes and the focus of her mother's attention, that precious, scarce resource, shifting permanently. "That's nice," Ilara said. She picked up her fork and took a bite of egg. She chewed slowly. Swallowed. "When do I meet him?" The perfect response. Polite. Appropriate. A normal daughter would be curious, maybe a little weirded out. Ilara was just efficient. Sarah's shoulders relaxed. She'd been braced for drama, for teenage anger. This was better. This was manageable. This Saturday, he could come for dinner. We could order in. "Sure," Ilara said, already closing her textbook. "I'll be upstairs. I have to finish an essay." She walked away, her steps measured and even. Upstairs, she didn't go to her desk. She went to her window, watching the rain streak down the glass, blurring the perfect yard. This was the variable she hadn't accounted for. The unpredictable human element. David wasn't just a new boyfriend. He was a witness. He was inside the ecosystem. He would see the dynamic between mother and daughter up close. A smart, observant man, a history teacher, used to analyzing narratives, to spotting inconsistencies in stories. Her current plan relied on a simple story. A stressed, demanding single mother pushes her perfect daughter to a breaking point. But if David was there, painting a picture of a happy, relaxed Sarah, if he became a source of joy for her mother, that story falls apart. The abusive mother character doesn't have a kind, funny boyfriend who adores her. The blueprint in her notebook was suddenly obsolete. The project scope had just changed dramatically. She opened her laptop. Not to study. Her searches became more specific, more urgent. Juvenile sentencing, Washington State. Can a minor be tried as an adult for premeditated murder? Inheritance laws, single parent, minor child. The calculus of her life had just been rewritten. The equation now had a new, dangerous variable. David. And David. He had no idea he'd just become a target. Saturday arrived. David came bearing a bottle of wine and a box of fancy donuts, a peace offering to the teenage daughter, he said with an easy laugh. He was exactly as advertised. Kind, funny, with gentle eyes. He listened intently when Sarah talked. He helped clear the plates without being asked. He tried to engage Alara, asking about her AP classes not like a teacher, but like someone genuinely interested. "Sarah says you're a brilliant pianist," he said, leaning forward. "That must take incredible discipline." "It's just practice," Alara said, giving him a small, shy smile, the version of herself she used for teachers and parents of friends. But her eyes were watching, recording. She saw the way her mother's hand rested on his arm. The way Sarah laughed, a real, full-throated sound Alara hadn't heard in years. She saw the future unfolding in front of her. David moving in. Marriage. Maybe a new baby. Her mother attention, her house, her inheritance, all of it, diluted. Shared. Taken. David, for his part, felt a chill he couldn't explain. When Alara's smile dropped, when she thought no one was looking, her face went blank. Completely, utterly empty. It was the look you'd give a piece of furniture. It lasted only a second, but he saw it. Later, as he was leaving, he pulled Sarah aside by the door. "She's intense," he said softly. "She's just shy," Sarah whispered back, smiling. "And a genius. They're not like other kids." He nodded, kissing her forehead. But driving away, the image of Alara's blank, calculating stare stayed with him. It wasn't shyness. It was assessment. It was the look a hunter gives its prey, deciding where to aim. Back in the spotless kitchen, Alara loaded the final plate into the dishwasher. Sarah was beaming, wiping down the counters. "Isn't he wonderful?" Sarah sighed, a world of hope in her voice. "He seems very nice," Alara said, her voice sweet. Plastic. Inside, the decision was made. The catalyst had done its job. David hadn't just entered their lives. He had accelerated a timeline. He had made Alara's world feel fragile, impermanent. Something to be defended. By any means necessary. The plan was no longer about creating a story. It was now about securing a future. Her future. And in her mind, there was only one obstacle standing in her way. You know when you get an idea, a real, fully formed idea, and suddenly the whole world sharpens into focus? The path forward just appears. For Alara, that moment came the night after meeting David. The polite smile she'd worn all through dinner fell away like a discarded mask. Up in her room, the perfect silence was no longer heavy. It was productive. It was a workshop. She opened the composition notebook to a fresh page. At the top, In her neat, architectural handwriting, she wrote 2 words: Operation Cicada. Cicadas, you might know, spend years underground, silent and unseen, before emerging all at once, loud and undeniable. That was the metaphor. The long, quiet preparation. The sudden, shocking result. And below that, she began her blueprint. Not with emotion. Not with anger. With bullet points. She wasn't planning a crime yet. She was writing a part. And she was going to audition for the role of her life, the victim. Let me show you how a mind like hers works. Step 1. The paper trail. She started a new journal. Not the secret one with the plans. A separate, pink leather-bound diary she could leave in her school backpack, or accidentally open on the kitchen counter. The entries were masterpieces of vague anguish. November 12th. Mom was in a mood again. Nothing I do is right. The piano isn't perfect. My posture is wrong. I feel like I'm disappearing. Notice she never wrote about yelling, or hitting, or anything specific. Just a mood. A feeling. Enough to paint a picture, but with no facts that could be checked or disproven. Step 2. The witnesses. She scheduled extra sessions with her school therapist, Dr. Evans. In that soft, beige office, Ilara would sit curled in the armchair, looking small. She'd answer questions quietly, dropping breadcrumbs. Do things ever feel tense at home? Dr. Evans would ask. Sometimes, Ilara would whisper, looking at her hands. When she's stressed from work, the silence is worse than yelling. Has she ever hurt you, Ilara? A perfect, telling pause. Then, not in the way you mean. A brilliant answer. It implies a deeper, more psychological harm. It makes the therapist lean in, wanting to solve the puzzle. Step 3. The public performance. She began a subtle campaign at school. She'd forget to turn in one assignment in English, her best subject. When the teacher expressed concern, she'd just look tired. Sorry. Things at home have been hard. She started wearing the same sweater 3 days in a row, looking just a little more frayed. She was constructing a character everyone would recognize, the girl with problems at home. But Phase 1 was just the foundation. Phase 2 was where things got physical. Sarah Vance owned a gun. A compact 9mm she kept in a biometric safe bolted to the floor of her walk-in closet. She'd gotten it after a string of break-ins in the neighborhood, took the safety course, and then mostly forgot about it. Ilara watched her mother open that safe once, 6 months prior, to show her it was there in case of a real emergency. Sarah had placed her thumb on the scanner, the light had flashed green, and the door had clicked open. Ilara remembered the code for the manual keypad backup. Sarah's birthday. Of course it was. One Wednesday afternoon, when she knew her mother was in back-to-back meetings downtown, Ilara went into the closet. The safe was small, gray, and cold to the touch. She keyed in the numbers, 0-8-1-5. A soft beep. The green light. The door swung open. Inside, the gun lay next to 2 boxes of ammunition. It was heavier than she expected. Cold. Serious. She didn't take it. Not yet. That would raise an alarm. She simply picked it up, held it, felt its weight. She noted the model, Smith & Wesson M&P Shield. She memorized the serial number. Then she put it back, exactly as it was, and closed the safe. That night, her internet research changed. It was no longer about psychology or law. It became technical. Smith & Wesson M&P Shield disassembly cleaning. Ballistics gunshot residue GSR washing techniques. Does bleach destroy DNA on metal surfaces? Average police response time, Queen and Neighborhood, Seattle. She watched YouTube videos of people field stripping the exact model of gun. She practiced the motions with a hairbrush in her locked bedroom. Slide release. Magazine catch. She needed to be able to take it apart, clean it, and put it back together blindfolded. She was studying for the most important test of her life. This column remained blank for now. She was waiting for the perfect set of conditions. but she knew the broad strokes. It would need to be a night her mother was home alone. A night with heavy rain to mask sound. A night when she, Elara, had a solid, verifiable reason to be somewhere else, or better yet, to be home asleep. She was building a clockwork monster, one precise gear at a time. And through it all, her daily performance was flawless. She played a stunning recital at school, receiving a standing ovation. Sarah was there, front row, crying happy tears. David was next to her, holding her hand. Elara took her bow, a picture of graceful accomplishment, while in her mind, she was calculating the angle of the stage lights, thinking how they'd feel on her face in a courtroom, playing a different part. That's the truly chilling part. The blueprint wasn't a separate thing. It was her life. Every smile at the dinner table, every A+ on a test, every perfectly played piano sonata, it was all part of the design. It was all evidence of her normalcy, her brilliance, her stability. The perfect camouflage for what was growing beneath the surface. The house on Magnolia Lane was quiet. But in one room, under the glow of a desk lamp, a countdown had begun. December 17th was that kind of night. In the house on Magnolia Lane, Sarah Vance was curled on the sofa, finally still. A thriller novel lay open but unread on her lap. A cup of tea steamed on the coffee table. For the first time in weeks, the Hastings merger was done. Her email was quiet. She was just home. Listening to the rain, thinking about David, about the Christmas plans they were making. A little smile touched her lips. Life, for once, felt soft at the edges. Upstairs, in the room that was a workshop, the final checks were being made. Elara sat at her desk. The blueprint, Operation Cicada, was open. Phase 3 was now filled in with precise, ink-black letters. Optimal date, December 17th. Time, 10:47 p.m. Weather, heavy precipitation, sound mask. Confirmed. Alibi status, active. The alibi was simple, and therefore beautiful. She had texted her mother at 9:30 p.m., "Headache, going to bed early, don't stay up too late," smiley face. She had then, from her own laptop, logged into her school's portal and clicked around on her chemistry homework for 10 minutes, creating a digital timestamp of her being awake, but quiet, in her room. At 10:15, she changed her clothes. Dark, soft leggings. A black, long-sleeved shirt. All cotton, nothing synthetic that might shed distinctive fibers. She pulled a navy blue beanie over her bright hair. She looked at herself in the mirror. Not with fear. Not with excitement. With appraisal. Like a painter checking their palette before the first stroke. At 10:30, she went to her door, listened. The faint sound of a television laugh track drifted up from downstairs. Her mother was still on the sofa. Elara moved to her bedroom window. It faced the side of the house, away from the street. She had already quietly removed the sash lock last week, saying it was sticking. Now, it slid up without a sound. The roar of the rain grew louder, crashing against the roof, the gutters overflowing. A cold, wet wind rushed in, smelling of pine and soaked earth. She didn't hesitate. She swung her legs over the sill, lowered herself until she was hanging by her fingertips, and dropped the short distance onto the soft, sodden mulch of the flower bed. The rain soaked through her clothes instantly. It was freezing. Perfect. She crouched in the shadows, letting her eyes adjust. The neighborhood was awash of gray shapes and orange halos around the streetlights. No one was out. No one would be. She moved, not toward the front door, but around the back of the house. She'd left the deadbolt on the patio door unlocked when she'd taken the recycling out after dinner. She slipped inside. The kitchen was dark. She stood there for a full minute, dripping on the tile, listening. The hum of the refrigerator. The ticking of the hall clock. The television from the living room. She moved through the dark house like a ghost. She knew every creak in the floorboards, every piece of furniture. She bypassed the living room archway and went silently up the front stairs she'd just come down the outside of. Into her mother's bedroom. Into the walk-in closet. The safe glinted in the faint light from the street. 0-8-1-5. Green light. Click. The gun was colder than the rain. Heavier. She took it and the single magazine loaded next to it. She didn't close the safe. Back down the stairs. Now, she approached the living room from the dining room, a space her mother couldn't see from the sofa. She took a deep, silent breath. And then she did the strangest thing. She reached out and knocked sharply on the wall. "Hello." Sarah's voice, alert, concerned. The television went mute. Ilara. Ilara stayed perfectly still. She heard the rustle of the sofa as Sarah stood up. Heard her footsteps on the hardwood, coming toward the archway. "Honey, is that you?" As Sarah stepped into the dining room, peering into the dark, Ilara stepped out from behind the door. She saw the sequence of expressions on her mother's face in the half-light. Confusion. Then recognition. Then a dawning, impossible horror as she saw the gun, saw the look on her daughter's face, a look of pure, focused intent. "Ilara, what?" There was no speech. No monologue. That was for movies. This was for real. Ilara raised the gun. Her grip was firm, two-handed, just like the video showed. She aimed for center mass, just like the forums advised. Sarah's hands came up, not in defense, but in a gesture of stunned surrender. Of disbelief. The sound, when it came, was nothing like in the movies. It wasn't a loud bang. It was a shocking, concussive crack that tore through the quiet house, louder than the thunder outside. Sarah folded. Not dramatically backwards. She just crumpled, like a puppet with its strings cut, onto the polished floor. Ilara didn't move. She listened. To the rain. To the ringing in her own ears. To the absence of any other sound. Protocol. She had to follow protocol. She stepped forward. She placed the gun on the floor, next to her mother's outstretched hand. She used a corner of her own black shirt to wipe the gun's grip, the slide, every surface she'd touched. She stood and took one last look. Then she turned and ran. Not out the front. Back through the kitchen. Out the patio door, leaving it wide open. She sprinted through the lashing rain, around the house, to the side where her window was still open. She hauled herself up, soaking wet, muscles burning. She fell inside onto her bedroom floor. She lay there for a second, heart hammering against her ribs, listening. Silence from downstairs. Just the rain. Now, the final performance. She stripped the wet clothes off, shoved them into a plastic grocery bag, then into her backpack. She put on pajamas. She ran to her bathroom, turned on the shower full blast, and stepped in, letting the hot water sluice over her, washing away the rain, the mud, the night. She got out. Toweled her hair until it was a damp, messy halo. She looked at herself in the mirror. Her face was pale. Her eyes were wide. She practiced a look. Shock, confusion, terror. She took a deep, shuddering breath, let her lower lip tremble. Then she opened her bathroom door, stepped into the hall, and screamed. It was a raw, piercing sound of pure childhood terror. The kind of sound no one can fake. M-O-M, M-O-M. She ran down the stairs, her voice breaking. M-O-M, are you down here? She reached the dining room. She stopped. She let her eyes find the shape on the floor. She let a second genuine gasp escape her, not for horror, but for the success of the scene. The reality of it. Then she started to sob. Hitching, uncontrollable sobs. She fumbled her phone from her pajama pocket. Her fingers, shaking perfectly, dialed 911. When the operator answered, Ilara's voice was a masterpiece of shattered glass. "My mom. Please, there's blood. I think someone shot my mom." And there it is. The line between before and after. The perfect, terrible silence after the crack of the gun. In one moment, a daughter. In the next, something else entirely. We hear about crimes of passion, of rage. But what about a crime of cold, flawless execution, where the only tears shed are part of the staging? The blueprint was complete. The foundation was poured. And it was built on a lie so big, so tragic, that everyone would be desperate to believe it. Now, All she had to do was act. Have you ever had to act? I don't mean in a school play. I mean really act. To force your face, your voice, your entire body to tell a lie so big that the people watching you need to believe it. That's what Alara did for the next 2 hours. And it was the performance of her lifetime. Kneeling on the cold dining room floor in her damp pajamas, phone clutched in her hand, she could already see the flashing red and blue lights painting the rain outside the windows. The 911 operator was still on the line, a calm voice in a storm of chaos. Stay on the line with me, honey. Help is almost there. Is the door unlocked? I think so, Alara whispered, her voice a trembling thread. Don't touch anything. Just stay where you are. Alara let her eyes drift to her mother's still form. She didn't feel grief. She felt a sharp, critical assessment. Is the scene right? Is the gun placed correctly? Did I remember to leave the patio door open? Her sobs were rhythmic, practiced. She timed them between the operator's questions. Then, the heavy knock on the front door. Police. They're here, she whispered to the operator. Okay, honey. I'm going to let you go now. Go slowly to the door. Alara stood up. Her legs shook, a perfect, involuntary tremor of shock. She walked to the front door, unlocked it, and pulled it open. 2 uniformed officers stood there, rain dripping from their caps. Behind them, the night was a kaleidoscope of swirling lights. The first officer, a woman with kind, worried eyes, took one look at Alara's pale, tear-streaked face and immediately softened. Hey, sweetheart. I'm Officer Torres. We're here to help. Where's your mom? Alara didn't speak. She just pointed a shaking finger toward the dining room, then wrapped her arms around herself, shrinking into the doorway. The perfect image of a child in trauma. Officer Torres stepped inside, her partner right behind. The moment they saw Sarah, their posture changed. Everything became urgent, radio static filling the air. We have a female, gunshot wound, unresponsive. Get medics in here now. The house exploded into activity. More officers. Paramedics with a gurney. The flash of cameras documenting the scene. Through it all, Alara was led to the living room sofa by a young paramedic who wrapped a foil blanket around her shoulders. What's your name, sweetie? Alara. How old are you, Alara? F-14. Did you see what happened? Alara shook her head violently, fresh tears welling up. I was upstairs, asleep. I heard a loud noise, like a crack. And then I came down and... She broke off, burying her face in her hands. The paramedic rubbed her back, murmuring comforting words. This was her story, and she stuck to it with the discipline of a soldier. Short sentences. Fragments. The confusion of someone just woken from sleep. She never offered extra details. She never corrected herself. She just trembled and cried. Then, the detective arrived. Detective Adrian Miller didn't make a sound when he entered. He was in his late 50s, with a tired face that had seen too many broken homes. He took in the scene with a slow, sweeping gaze. The open patio door, the rain blowing in, the single shell casing on the floor, the gun near Sarah's hand, the terrified girl on the sofa. He knelt in front of Alara, his voice low and calm. Alara? I'm Detective Miller. I'm so sorry about your mom. I need to ask you a few questions, okay? Can you tell me what you remember? And so she told him. The same simple, tragic story. Asleep. A loud crack. Came downstairs. Found her. Called for help. Did you hear anything else? Voices. Footsteps. A car. A slow, dazed shake of her head. Just the rain. It was so loud. Was the patio door usually locked? Mom locked it before bed. Always. Was anything taken? Did the house look different? She looked around, her eyes wide and lost. I don't know. I just saw her. Every answer was perfect. It gave him nothing and everything. It painted the picture she wanted, A random, violent home invasion. A terrible wrong place, wrong time tragedy. Detective Miller nodded, patted her shoulder gently. Okay. You've been very brave. Is there someone we can call for you? Your dad? Another relative? It was just us, Ilara said, and a fresh wave of sobs shook her. That part was true. And it was the most devastating line in her script. They took her to the hospital for observation. A kind female officer sat with her in a quiet room. Ilara stared at the wall, letting the exhaustion she genuinely felt wash over her. She wasn't pretending to be tired. She was tired. The work had been immense. At dawn, they released her into the temporary custody of a family friend, a neighbor Sarah sometimes had coffee with. The woman hugged Ilara tightly, weeping. You poor, poor child. Ilara rested her head on the woman's shoulder. Over the woman's back, her eyes were open, clear, and dry. She had done it. She had passed through the first and most dangerous gate. The police saw her as the primary victim, the traumatized daughter. The case was being typed up as a brutal, likely random break-in. As she was led to the neighbor's car, she saw Detective Miller standing on the Vance porch, staring out at the rain-washed street. He wasn't looking at her. He was just thinking. And for just a second, a fraction of a second, she allowed herself to feel it. The thrill of victory. The smug certainty. I am smarter than all of you. It was the same feeling that would, months later, make her smile in that courtroom. But in that moment, on the hospital curb, she just looked like a shattered little girl in borrowed clothes, being led away from the worst night of her life. Let's sit right here for a second. At the edge of belief. We all want to trust the crying child, don't we? It's our instinct. To protect, to believe, to comfort. Ilara knew that. She weaponized that instinct. But here's a question for you. When you tell a lie, even a perfect one, what do you leave behind? Not evidence, but a feeling. A taste in the air. Something that just doesn't fit. Detective Miller was an old house cat who'd heard every squeak in the floorboards. And as he stood on that porch, watching the taillights of the neighbor's car disappear into the gray Seattle morning, one thought circled in his mind. It's too clean. His phone buzzed. It was Rodriguez from Digital Forensics. Miller, you asked about the daughter's electronics. School laptop, clean. But we pulled the router history for the house. Got something weird. Miller sat up. Weird how? The night of the murder. There's activity from her laptop's IP address at 10:38 p.m. A login to the school portal. Lasted about 9 minutes. So she was awake, doing homework. Maybe. But the 911 call came in at 10:52. That's a 14-minute gap. If you just heard a gunshot in your house, are you logging into your chemistry homework for 9 minutes before you call for help? The air in Miller's office got thinner. That wasn't a splinter. That was a crack. And there's more, Rodriguez continued. We did a deeper dive on her search history, going back months. It's been meticulously wiped. Too meticulously. Normal kids have a messy digital footprint. Hers is sanitized. Except for a bunch of activity last spring. What kind of activity? Searches for Washington state inheritance law. Can a minor own property? Guardianship after single-parent death. Miller felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. Send me the full report. He hung up and looked back at the photo of Ilara Vance on his screen. The one from the hospital, eyes wide and hollow in a foil blanket. What are you? He thought. A victim? Or a sculptor? He drove back to Magnolia Lane. The house was a silent, taped-up monument. He walked through it again, slowly, this time ignoring the patio door, ignoring the safe. He went upstairs to Ilara's bedroom. It was the room of a ghost. Perfectly ordered. He opened the closet. Neat rows of clothes. He looked under the bed. Nothing but a single, forgotten dust bunny. Then he saw it. On the desk, next to a stack of textbooks, was a sleek, silver pen. It was a nice pen. Expensive. and it was sitting perfectly parallel to the edge of the desk. He looked around. Everything was parallel. The books, the lamp, the monitor. It was a room of right angles. His own daughter's room, when she was 14, had looked like a hurricane hit a clothing store. This was a showroom. He went to the window, the one that looked over the side yard. He examined the lock. It was loose in its housing. Not broken, but deliberately loosened? He pushed the window up. It slid silently, effortlessly, on its track. No sticking. He leaned out. The flower bed below was a mess of mulch, deeply indented. Someone had jumped out here. Or climbed in. He pulled his head back in, his heart beating a slow, heavy rhythm. The pieces were starting to click together, forming a picture he didn't want to see. A brilliant, obsessive girl with a sanitized digital life. A staged crime scene with a procedural error. A financial motive hidden in search histories. A bedroom that felt like a set. A window that was an easy escape route. He thought of Ilara's face. Not the crying face from the hospital. The calm, composed face she'd had for just a second when he'd first arrived, before the tears started again. The face of someone assessing the room. He walked back downstairs, out to his car. He sat behind the wheel, the rain starting to mist the windshield again. The official story was a random tragedy. It was clean. It would let everyone sleep at night, even if the case never closed. The other story, the one taking shape in his mind, was a monster. It would upend everything. It would mean a 14-year-old girl was one of the coldest killers he'd ever pursued. He started the car. The wipers swept across the glass, clearing his view. He wasn't going to let this go into the unsolved stack. He was going to peel it back, layer by layer, until he found the rotten core. The perfect crime had its first crack. And Detective Miller was going to hammer a wedge right into it. All right, let's stop right here at the crossroads. Detective Miller has a choice. He can follow the easy story, the tragic break-in, or he can chase a hunch that leads into a much darker, more complicated place. So I want to ask you, what would you do? If you were in his shoes, with that gnawing feeling in your gut and those small, strange details that don't add up, would you close the book, or would you open a whole new, more terrifying one? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Let's see what you think before we follow Miller down the rabbit hole. Because from here on out, it's not about finding a random intruder. It's about unmasking someone hiding in plain sight. And that is a much more dangerous game. Ben looked like he hadn't seen the sun in a decade. He gestured at 3 large monitors on his desk, each showing streams of code, file trees, and hex dumps that looked like pure chaos. "She's good," Ben said, not taking his eyes off the screens. I mean, scary good. For a 14-year-old. Miller leaned forward. "What did you find?" "A ghost," Ben said, clicking his mouse. Most people, when they delete something, they send it to the recycle bin and empty it. That's like throwing a letter in the trash. We can still fish it out. Ilara. She used a digital incinerator. Military-grade wiping software. She scorched the earth. On the screen, a log showed hundreds of files, permanently deleted and overwritten. "So there's nothing?" Miller asked, the cold stone of certainty in his gut warming to frustration. "I didn't say that," Ben replied, a faint smile on his face. Digital detectives love a challenge. She made one mistake. One tiny, human mistake. He pulled up a different window. It showed a timeline of activity on the Vance family's internet router. "See this? The night of the murder, her laptop connects to the school portal at 10:38 p.m. We know that. But look here, at 10:05 p.m. He pointed to a line. A 15-minute connection to a VPN server in the Netherlands. A VPN, a virtual private network, tunnels your internet traffic somewhere else in the world, making it nearly impossible to trace. It's what privacy experts use. And criminals. She was hiding her activity, Miller said. Exactly. But here's her mistake. The VPN software she used has a kill switch feature. If the VPN connection drops, It cuts all internet traffic so your real IP address isn't exposed. Sometime between 10:20 and 10:38 that night, during that huge storm, her VPN connection flickered. Just for a few seconds. The kill switch engaged. And in those few seconds, her laptop automatically tried to reconnect to her last known wireless network, which was the home router. Ben zoomed in. The log showed a single, tiny ping. A digital handshake that lasted less than a heartbeat. In that blink, Ben said, his voice dropping, her real IP address requested a connection to a cloud storage server. Not Google Drive or Dropbox. Something more obscure. A place called Vault Lock. Miller's pulse quickened. Can you get in? Getting the service to give us access? A warrant will take weeks. But the address is a clue. Because when I cross-referenced that server address with her scrubbed search history, he opened another window. It was a list of recovered search fragments, pieces the wiping software had missed in the hard drive's unallocated space. The searches were chillingly specific. Asterisk, Vault Lock Zero Knowledge Encryption. Asterisk, can cloud storage be subpoenaed? Asterisk, creating hidden volumes within encrypted containers. She didn't just delete files, Detective, Ben said, turning to look at Miller, his glasses reflecting the cold light of the monitors. She built a digital safe. And then she hid the safe behind a false wall. This isn't a kid hiding a diary. This is espionage-level tradecraft. Miller stared at the fragments of text on the screen. They were like listening to a shadow speak. Every term was about concealment, about creating a space where thoughts could exist in perfect, untouchable secrecy. What's in the vault, Ben? Can you tell? Ben shook his head. Not without the password. It's zero knowledge encryption. Even the company that runs the server can't see what's inside. All I know is the vault's name. He clicked one last time. The evidence log displayed the file name that had been requested in that split second of exposure. Operation_Cicada Unclustered VLK. Operation Cicada. The master file. The name alone sent a shiver down Miller's spine. Cicadas. Those insects that live underground for years, silent, before emerging all at once. He pictured Alara in that perfect, silent room. Not as a grieving daughter, but as a general. Plotting a campaign. Writing operations orders for a war only she knew she was fighting. There's more, Ben said quietly. The router history shows these VPN connections going back 6 months. Every Thursday night, like clockwork, for 1 to 2 hours. She was going somewhere online. Somewhere she didn't want anyone to know about. What's on Thursday nights? Miller muttered, more to himself. My guess? That's when she did her real research. When she visited the forums, read the articles, asked the questions she couldn't risk being linked to her. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment thing, Detective. This was a long-term project. She was a digital ghost, learning how to haunt someone in the real world. Miller left the stuffy room, the cold air of the hallway hitting him like a slap. The victim narrative was gone, shattered. In its place was the outline of something far more calculating. Alara Vance wasn't just a smart girl who got lucky. She was a strategist. She had a plan called Operation Cicada. She had a hidden vault containing the master blueprint. And for months, she'd been secretly visiting a corner of the internet so dark, she needed a digital disguise to get there. He was no longer investigating a murder. He was profiling an intelligence operative. And the most terrifying part was, she was only 14. How deep did the rabbit hole go? What other secrets were waiting in that vault, in the ghostly traces of her Thursday night visits? The ghost had left a fingerprint, and Miller was going to follow it right into the heart of the machine. There's a sound therapists know well. It's the sound of a quiet room when someone is deciding how much to tell you. It's not silence. It's the sound of a door being held ajar, just a crack. Dr. Lillian Evans's office was full of that sound. Soft beige walls. A comfortable armchair. A box of tissues placed just within reach. It was a room designed for secrets, for soft landings. And now, sitting across from Detective Miller, Dr. Evans felt a profound, professional shame. Because she realized she hadn't been listening to secrets at all. She'd been listening to a script. She opened the elegant, leather-bound notebook on her desk, the one she used for session notes, written in her own shorthand. "I need you to understand the context," she said, her voice tight. Ilara was a referral. A high-achieving student showing signs of increased anxiety and social withdrawal. Her mother was concerned. Not frantic. Just checking a box. Miller nodded, letting her talk. In the beginning, she was a classic high-pressure kid. Talked about the weight of expectations. The constant striving. It was all very academic. Then, about 5 months ago, the tone shifted. Dr. Evans flipped through the pages, her finger tracing her own writing. She began talking about the silence at home. Not fights. Not arguments. The absence of sound. She said it was heavier than yelling. That's a sophisticated observation for a 14-year-old. I noted it as emotional intelligence. Now, I see it as set dressing. She found the entry she was looking for. Here. Session from October 12th. I asked, when your mom is stressed from work, how does that show up? Dr. Evans read her own notes aloud, her voice hollow. Patient stated, she doesn't get mad. She gets precise. Everything has to be in its right place, including me. Patient then became quiet for several minutes. When prompted, she said, sometimes I feel like I'm a project she's trying to perfect, not a person. Miller leaned forward. That sounds like someone describing emotional neglect. Or abuse. That's what I thought, Dr. Evans said, a flicker of frustration in her eyes. It's textbook language for a child feeling unseen, pressurized. It's what we're trained to hear. But listen to the next part. She turned the page. I asked if her mother had ever been physically punitive. Patient shook her head, then said, not in the way you mean. I asked her to explain. She said, the things that leave marks aren't the ones that hurt the most. Dr. Evans looked up at Miller. Do you hear it? It's a perfect non-answer. It implies a deeper, more psychological harm without providing a single fact. It's a hook. She was baiting me to ask more, to dig for a horror that she never had to describe. Because it didn't exist. The clock ticked in the quiet office. The shame was a physical thing in the room now. She was using the language of therapy against me, Dr. Evans whispered. She'd done her research. She knew what a victim of covert narcissistic abuse was supposed to sound like. And she performed it flawlessly. Miller tapped his notepad. Did she ever mention a plan? Any violent ideation? Never. Not a whisper. That's what's so chilling. The narrative she was building wasn't of a girl who might snap. It was of a girl who was being slowly, quietly erased. It was a justification, planted in advance. If something ever happened, if she ever did something, well, look at the environment. Look at the psychological pressure. You could see how a child might break. She closed the notebook, as if she could shut away the complicity she felt. After the incident, she continued, I went back over my notes, looking for the lie. And I found it. It wasn't in what she said. It was in what she didn't do. What do you mean? A truly traumatized child, one living in that kind of emotional pressure, they're inconsistent. They have moments of defiance, of regression. They act out. Ilara's performance was perfectly consistent. Session to session, the character developed logically, slowly. There were no contradictions. No messy, human outbursts. It was a flawless dramatic arc. She looked out the window at the gray Seattle sky. The last session she had with me was 3 days before Sarah died. She was quieter than usual. I asked what was on her mind. She said, I'm just thinking about endings. How some endings look like accidents, even when they're not. A cold knot tightened in Miller's stomach. I wrote that down as metaphorical adolescent angst. A comment on her parents' divorce, maybe. Now. Dr. Evans shook her head. That was her telling me. Right to my face. And I, the trained professional, wrote it down as poetry. She slid the notebook across the desk to Miller. Take it. It's not a record of therapy. It's a record of my own gullibility. It's the blueprint for the why. She wasn't just planning the act. She was planning the explanation. She was writing the headline for her own crime, and she used my pen to do it. Miller took the notebook. It felt heavy. As he stood to leave, Dr. Evans spoke again, her voice barely audible. Detective, that girl looked at me for months and saw a tool. A prop. She calculated exactly what I wanted to hear, and she fed it to me, piece by piece. What does that make her? Miller had no answer. He walked out into the hallway, the therapist's notebook under his arm. It wasn't a digital ghost. It was a paper trail, written in the innocent language of pain, leading directly to a premeditated heart. Ilara hadn't just fooled her mother, or the police. She'd fooled someone whose entire job was to see beneath the surface. She hadn't just hidden her plans. She'd hidden them inside the story of her own victimhood. And the most terrifying part? The script was so good, a part of Miller still wondered if some of it was true. If maybe Sarah Vance had been a monster. That was the genius of it. She'd sown doubt so deep, it might never be fully uprooted. Pause. Let that sit with you. The idea that someone can walk into a room built for truth, and use it to build a lie so perfect it's almost beautiful in its cruelty. We trust therapists, don't we? We trust them to see what we can't see in ourselves. But what if the person on the couch is seeing them more clearly? What if they're not there to be understood, but to be manufactured? The character of Ilara the victim was now fully documented, signed and dated by an expert. It was the ultimate alibi. But every good script needs a villain. And in her story, the villain had just found a boyfriend. A witness who might have seen a glimpse of the real girl behind the act. It's time to hear from David. Some people, when they're grieving, can't stop talking. They need to fill the silence with memories, with stories, with sound. David Ridgway wasn't one of those people. He sat in his small, book-crammed living room, a steaming mug untouched in front of him. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in 2 weeks. The easy smile Detective Miller had seen in photos was gone, replaced by a deep, bewildered sorrow. I keep thinking, David said, his voice rough, if I'd said something sooner. If I'd trusted that cold feeling in my gut. Miller waited. He'd learned that with the smart ones, the grieving ones, you just had to let the silence do the work. She was the best person I'd ever met, David began, staring at his hands. Warm. Funny underneath all that lawyerly armor. She was so proud of Ilara. It was all she talked about at first. Ilara's grades, Ilara's piano, Ilara's future. He took a shaky breath. Then, about a month in, the tone changed. It was small things. Ilara's been quiet lately. I feel like I can't reach her. Sarah thought it was teenage stuff. She thought it was about me. That Ilara was jealous of our relationship. Was she? Miller asked. David shook his head slowly. No. That's what I told Sarah. It wasn't jealousy. It was assessment. The first time I came for dinner, Ilara was perfectly polite. Charming, even. But when Sarah went to get more wine, the smile just switched off. Like a light being cut. She looked at me. Not with anger. With calculation. Like I was a variable in an equation she was solving. It lasted 2 seconds. Then Sarah came back, and the smile clicked on again. He finally looked up at Miller. His eyes haunted. Have you ever met someone and just known, deep in your bones, that they don't like you? Not in a petty way. In a fundamental way. Like your very existence is an inconvenience to their world order? That was Ilara. Miller nodded. Did you tell Sarah this? I tried. Gently. I said, she's an intense kid. Sarah just laughed it off. Said she was shy, that she had social anxiety. She had an explanation for everything. The perfect grades? pressure to achieve, the quietness, sensitivity, the coldness, a defense mechanism. David's voice broke. She was building a case for her daughter's innocence long before anyone else even suspected a crime. What else did you see? Miller's pen was poised. The control, David said, the word coming out sharp. It was in the little things. Sarah would suggest a movie. Ilara would have already read the book and point out a flaw in the adaptation, making Sarah feel silly for suggesting it. Sarah would buy the wrong kind of almond milk. Ilara would quietly point to the brand she preferred, already in the cart, making Sarah's choice feel like a failure. It was 1,000 tiny corrections. A constant, quiet remodeling of her mother's reality. By the end, Sarah was second-guessing everything. What to wear, what to make for dinner, how to phrase an email. Ilara had made herself the authority on her mother's own life. He told Miller about the last time he saw Sarah alive. 3 days before the murder. They'd gone for a walk at Discovery Park. Sarah had been quiet. She said, "David, do you ever feel like you're living someone else's life? Like you're a guest in your own house?" I asked her what she meant. She just shook her head, said she was being silly. But now I think she was starting to feel the walls of the maze Ilara had built around her. She just didn't know her daughter was the architect. Miller leaned forward. "Mr. Ridgway, this is important. Did Ilara ever ask you anything unusual? About your job, about history, about crime?" David's eyes widened, as if he'd just remembered something buried. "Yes. God, yes. About a month ago. We were in the kitchen. She was doing homework at the counter. Out of nowhere, she asked me about the Romanovs." "The Romanovs? The Russian royal family?" "Yes." She asked, "If you were going to make the execution of the Romanovs look like an accident, how would you do it?" I laughed. I thought it was a macabre but clever homework question. I said something about historical context, about how you'd need to control the narrative afterward. She listened so intently. Then she said, "So it's all about the story people tell after. The evidence is just set dressing." David put his head in his hands. I thought she was being philosophical. She was being literal. He had one more thing. The week before the murder, he'd gone over to help Sarah hang some shelves in the garage. He'd gone to the downstairs bathroom. On the back of the door, someone had taped a single, typewritten quote. He'd read it, found it odd, and forgotten about it until now. "Do you remember what it said?" Miller asked, his notebook forgotten. David closed his eyes, summoning the memory. It was a line from Shakespeare. Hamlet. It said, "I must be cruel only to be kind. Thus bad begins, and worse remains behind." The room went very still. "She was psyching herself up," David whispered, a tear finally tracking down his cheek. "She was taping her own justification to the back of a door, where only she would see it. I must be cruel only to be kind." She was the hero of her own story. And in that story, Sarah had to die for Ilara's better future to begin. He looked at Miller, utterly lost. How do you fight that? How do you protect someone from a threat they love? A threat that lives in the room next door, that plays Chopin beautifully, that smiles and calls them Mom? Detective Miller had no answer. He left David Ridgway sitting in the quiet of his book-filled living room, surrounded by the ghost of a woman he loved, and the terrifying living shadow of the girl who had killed her. The testimony wasn't about a smoking gun. It was about smoke itself. The creeping, chilling haze of psychological manipulation that had filled the house on Magnolia Lane until the real Sarah Vance had been slowly erased, replaced by the villain in her daughter's script. And the scariest part? The villain had been kind, polite, perfect, until she decided it was time to be cruel. "Let's sit with that question," David asked. "How do you protect someone from a threat they love? When the monster doesn't look like a monster, but like your own child. We build our lives on certain truths. A mother's love. A child's innocence. What happens when someone uses those truths as camouflage? when they hide a weapon inside a hug. The case is no longer about forensics. It's about philosophy. It's about the stories we tell ourselves to make horrible things make sense. And Ilara's story was coming together. But she'd written it down. Not just in a digital vault. In a journal. And Miller was about to get his hands on it. There's a difference between reading a diary and reading a manifesto. A diary is messy. Its feelings spilling out. Its crossed-out words and tear-smudged ink. It's human. What Detective Miller held in his hands, protected by blue latex gloves, was not a diary. It was a manual. The pink leather-bound journal recovered from Ilara's school backpack felt innocuous. Almost a cliché. But as Dr. Evans had warned him, it was the core of the victim narrative. Now, with a court order, it sat in the stark light of the forensics lab, about to be taken apart word by word. Dr. Anya Sharma, a forensic linguist, stood over it. She didn't look like a cop. She looked like a passionate literature professor, which she had been, before she realized she was more interested in the language of lies than the language of sonnets. The first pass is obvious, she said, her voice calm and analytical. It's the surface text. The woe is me narrative. Listen. She read an entry from late October, her voice flat, stripping away any emotion. November 3rd. The silence after she comes home from work is the worst. It's like waiting for a storm that never breaks. I practice piano until my fingers ache, just to have a sound that's mine. It's good, Anya said, looking at Miller over her glasses. Evocative. It creates a mood of oppressive tension. It implies a volatile parent without ever saying it. This is what the therapist saw. This is what a grieving daughter would show the world. She then placed a clear acetate sheet over the page. On it, she'd made marks in red pen. But let's look at the architecture of the lie. Not the words. The pattern. She pointed to the red marks. See the date. Always precise. The entries are almost exactly the same length. The emotional beats are paced, a moment of sadness, a moment of fear, a moment of hopelessness. In a real adolescent diary, emotions are chaotic. Entries are long one day, a single sentence the next. This is uniform. It's manufactured. Miller felt a chill. She was writing to a template. Exactly. Now, Anya said, her eyes glinting with the thrill of the hunt, let's talk about what's not here. There are no proper nouns. No names of friends she might have confided in. No specific incidents that could be verified or disproven. No moments of joy or rebellion that would complicate the victim portrait. It's a character sketch, not a life. She turned to a page from mid-November. She said my college essay was competent, but lacking heart. What does that even mean? Is there a heart monitor for ambition? This is clever, Anya noted. It takes a normal, critical parent comment, the kind any high achiever's parent might make, and reframes it as a brutal personal attack. It's a masterclass in reinterpretation. She's teaching the reader how to view her mother. But the real revelation came when they used a multispectral light scanner on the pages. It revealed indentations, the ghosts of words written on pages that had been torn out. Anya worked carefully, brushing a fine magnetic powder over the page. Like a photograph developing in reverse, faint, gray lines began to appear beneath the heartfelt diary entry. They weren't emotional outpourings. They were lists. Under the entry about piano practice, the indented ghostwriting read, *, establish auditory alibi, music. *, check police sound propagation reports for zip code. Research GSR adhesion to cotton versus synthetic fabrics. Miller's breath caught. It was like hearing a killer whisper plans under a lullaby. Page after page, the same pattern. The surface, a vulnerable girl's sorrow. Underneath, buried in the paper's memory, the cold, logistical steps of a murder. I feel so invisible around her. Indentation. Acquire disposable gloves, size small. Test for dexterity. Sometimes I wish I could just disappear. Indentation. *, map blind spots from neighbor security cameras. Timing of Mr. Henderson's dog walk, 10:15 p.m. Asterisk. It was a palimpsest. A parchment where a holy text had been scraped away to write a ledger of death. Except here, the holy text, the innocent diary, was written over the ledger, to hide it. The ultimate hiding place, Anya whispered, awe and horror mixing in her voice. She hid her plans inside her own purported victim statement. She knew the diary would be found. She wanted it to be found. It was the keystone of her defense. And she used it as scratch paper for her logistics. The arrogance is breathtaking. She pointed to the final, most damning indentation. It was on the back page, beneath a flowery sentence about hoping for a better tomorrow. The ghost words were a single, stark line. D-Day. Patio door open. Safe open. One shot. School portal login for timestamp. Then scream. It was the checklist. The run sheet for the night of December 17th. Miller stared at the faint, gray words. All the speculation, the hunches, the digital ghosts, they solidified here in the physical impression of a pen on paper. This was no longer a theory. This was a confession, written in invisible ink beneath a lie. The journal wasn't decoded. It was dissected. And on the slab, the heart of it wasn't a broken child. It was a ticking clock. So let that settle. The duality of it. One story for the world to cry over. Another story, pressed right into its spine, for her to follow. We all have a face we show the world. But what if, for someone, that face isn't a mask hiding fear, but a mask hiding a spreadsheet? A cost-benefit analysis written in blood? She thought of everything. The alibi, the evidence, the emotional narrative. But in her arrogance, in her need to use every tool, even her own fake diary, as a notepad, she left the one thing she couldn't erase. The memory of the paper itself. The blueprint was no longer hidden in a digital vault. It was here, in the ghost in the machine. And it pointed to a killer with a chilling, clinical mind. The journal was the why. Now, they had the how. All that was left was the who. And everyone already knew who. They just had to prove she was the monster, not the victim. The architect, not the wreckage. You know that feeling when you're in a crowded place, but you suddenly feel completely alone? Like a pocket of silence in a storm of noise? That's where Ilara Vance was when they came for her. It was a Tuesday, just after second period. She was at her locker, methodically swapping her chemistry textbook for her history text. Her world was still perfect. The police had stopped calling. The neighbors had stopped bringing casseroles. The narrative was set, a tragic, unsolved crime. She was the brilliant, grieving daughter, now living with a kind, oblivious aunt. The future was a clean, open page. She heard the commotion first. A hush rolling down the hallway like a wave, followed by whispers. She looked up. Principal Hendricks was walking toward her, his face a stiff mask. Flanking him were two people who didn't belong in the bright, noisy hallways of Roosevelt High. Detective Miller, looking older and more tired than he had that first night. And a uniformed female officer, her face carefully neutral. The sea of students parted. 100 phones were raised, recording. Ilara didn't freeze. She didn't panic. She closed her locker with a soft, definitive click. She turned to face them, her expression one of polite, faint confusion. The perfect student awaiting instruction. Principal Hendricks stopped a few feet away. "Ilara," he said, his voice strained. "These officers need to speak with you." Detective Miller stepped forward. He didn't play games. He didn't try to soften it in front of her peers. His voice was low, clear, and carried in the sudden, total silence of the hallway. "Ilara Vance, you are under arrest for the murder of Sarah Vance." He Mirandized her, the familiar rhythmic words sounding alien and brutal in a school corridor. "You have the right to remain silent." Ilara listened. Her head tilted slightly, as if she was translating a difficult passage in a foreign language. The confusion on her face wasn't fear. It was intellectual annoyance. like a mathematician who'd been presented with an incorrect answer. The female officer approached, a pair of silver handcuffs in her hand. This was the moment. The moment the mask had to crack. The moment the terrified orphan would weep, or collapse, or scream denials. Ilara simply held out her wrists, one over the other, palms up. A graceful, almost serene gesture. The click of the cuffs locking around her thin wrists was the loudest sound in the world. As the officer guided her hands behind her back, Ilara's eyes found Detective Miller's. And she asked a single question. Her voice was calm, curious, and colder than the metal on her skin. Which one of you messed up? Not, this is a mistake. Not, I didn't do it. Which one of you messed up? She believed, with every fiber of her being, that the failure was theirs. A flawed procedure. A missed clue. An error in their inferior, linear thinking. Her plan was perfect. Therefore, any contradiction to that perfection had to be their fault. The question hung in the air, sucking the oxygen out of the hallway. Miller didn't answer. He just nodded to the officer, and they began to lead her away. She walked between them, head high, back straight, through a gauntlet of her stunned classmates. She didn't look at them. She looked straight ahead, as if already walking toward a different, more important room. Someone in the crowd sobbed. A teacher turned away, unable to watch. They led her out the front doors, into the gray daylight. The swarm of media that had been tipped off was waiting, a wall of cameras and shouted questions. Flashes popped like gunshots. Ilara paused at the top of the steps. For a fraction of a second, she seemed to see it all. The cameras, the chaos, the story spiraling out of her control. And in that moment, something in her eyes shifted. The annoyance solidified into something harder. Something resolved. Then she was guided down the steps and into the back of an unmarked sedan. Not a squad car. A subtle choice. Miller wasn't treating her like a street criminal. He was treating her like what she was, a unique and dangerous specimen. As the car pulled away from the curb, leaving the school and the screaming headlines behind, Ilara sat in the quiet back seat. She looked out the window at the familiar streets of her neighborhood sliding by. And she smiled. A small, private, chilling smile. It wasn't a smile of joy. It was the smile of a grandmaster who's been forced to play a less interesting opponent on an easier board. The game had changed. But in her mind, she was still the smartest person in the room. She was just moving to a new room. The performance was over. Now came the trial. And in a trial, there were rules. Rules she could learn. Rules she could bend. Rules she could break. The arrogant monster had been caged. But she was already studying the lock. So, there it is. Not with a bang, but with a cold, logical question in a high school hallway. Which one of you messed up? It's the most revealing thing she could have said. It shows her entire worldview. She is the flawless architect. Anyone who contradicts her reality is an error in the system. But now she's in the system. And the system has its own rules, its own players. Like defense attorneys. And prosecutors. And judges. The next phase isn't about evidence. It's about persuasion. It's about whose story the jury will believe. And Ilara has been writing her story for months. She thinks she's ready. She thinks she can control this, too. But she's never met anyone like Judge William Hawthorne. Jail isn't what you think. It's not constant noise and chaos. For most of the day, especially in juvenile detention, it's a profound, echoing boredom. It's the sound of time passing, minute by excruciating minute. For Ilara Vance, it was a new laboratory. They'd put her in a segregated unit. For her own protection, they said. Really, it was for everyone else's. She was too famous, too young, and the nature of her crime cast a long, cold shadow. So she sat in a small, clean cell, with a cot, a sink, a toilet, and a single high, slit-like window that let in a blade of gray Seattle light. And she got to work. Her first attorney, a harried public defender named Mark, saw a traumatized child. He spoke to her in a soft, condescending voice. "We'll plead this down," he promised. Diminished capacity. Extreme emotional distress. You've been through so much. Ilara listened to his strategy for exactly 7 minutes. Then she cut him off, her voice not cold, but politely analytical, like a teacher correcting a well-meaning student. That strategy is statistically ineffective in cases with premeditation established by digital forensics, she said. It also cements the prosecution's narrative of an unstable, reactive child. We need to contest the premeditation itself. The journal is interpretable. The digital evidence is circumstantial. The staged break-in could be the work of an actual intruder who panicked. Mark blinked. He'd never had a client, let alone a 14-year-old one, quote conviction rates and deconstruct discovery materials. She fired him 2 days later. You lack the necessary aggressive posture, she told him, as if reviewing a restaurant. She requested a private attorney. Her second lawyer, Carla West, was a shark. Ambitious, sharp, known for courtroom theatrics. She saw the headlines, the notoriety. She saw a career-making case. Ilara studied her for a week. She listened to Carla's bold plan to put the entire justice system on trial, to paint Sarah as a monster, to make Ilara a poster child for parental abuse. Too emotional, Ilara finally pronounced. It relies on swaying the jury's heart. I need someone who will fight in the mind. The battle is over evidence, not empathy. You're trying to sell a story. I need someone who will dismantle theirs, brick by brick. Carla, stunned and insulted, withdrew from the case. The guards started to talk. The kid in Seg was cycling through lawyers-like outfits, and she was interviewing them. Finally, the court appointed Robert Lyman, mid-50s, bald. Wore suits that were a decade out of style. He had the weary eyes of a man who'd seen every trick and believed in very few causes. He was known as a legal mechanic. He didn't do flashy. He did precise. He sat across from her in the visitation room, a stack of files between them. He didn't offer pity. He didn't make promises. The state's case is built on 3 pillars, he said, his voice a dry monotone. The digital footprint. The journal indentations. The financial motive. They're strong. Your best hope is to challenge the admissibility of the digital search and the journal analysis. Argue the warrants were overbroad. Create reasonable doubt around the edges. A full acquittal is unlikely. We're looking at a plea for a reduced sentence in a juvenile facility until you're 21. Ilara studied him. He wasn't talking to a victim. He was talking to a client. An intellect. A problem to be managed. A slow, approving nod. Finally, she said, a realist. Now, let's discuss the flaws in the search warrant affidavit. Paragraph 4 relies on Detective Miller's statement about the VPN kill switch ping. His description of the technology is technically inaccurate. We can move to suppress based on a materially false statement. Robert Lyman didn't smile, but something shifted behind his weary eyes. A spark of grim recognition. He'd met his match, and she was a child in an orange jumpsuit. The games weren't just with her lawyers. They were with the system itself. She learned the guards' schedules, their names, their moods. She traded her dessert, a pre-packaged brownie, for a worn copy of the Washington State Criminal Code from the unit's meager library. She read it like a novel, underlining passages. She was polite to the guards, but never friendly. Friendly could be used. Polite was a wall. She became a ghost in the machine, a silent, observing presence. The only time she slipped was with a young guard named Henderson. He'd been making extra rounds past her cell, his eyes lingering. One day, he stopped at her door. It must be hard, he said, his voice falsely gentle. Being so smart and being in here. Maybe we could talk sometime. I could get you some better books. Ilara looked up from her codebook. She didn't glare. She didn't smile. She just looked at him the way you might look at a mildly interesting insect. A specimen. Officer Henderson, she said, her voice clear and carrying. Your offer constitutes a breach of professional ethics and could be construed as grooming behavior toward a minor in state custody. My attorney's contact information is on file if you'd like to discuss it further." His face went white, then red. He walked away and never made eye contact with her again. Word spread. The girl in Seg wasn't scared. She wasn't broken. She was armed. With her mind. She was using the rules of the prison as a weapon, and the rules of the law as a shield. She was preparing for the ultimate test. Not a test of guilt or innocence. A test of her own brilliance versus the lumbering, ancient beast of the justice system. And she couldn't wait. Because in a courtroom, there would be an audience. There would be a judge. There would be a record. Finally, a stage worthy of her performance. Think about that. Transforming a prison cell into a war room. Turning every interaction into a tactical move. Most people in her situation are drowning in fear or self-pity. She's calibrating. She's treating the justice system like a new, complex piano she needs to master. But here's the thing about the law. It's not just about logic. It's about people. It's about 12 strangers in a jury box. It's about a judge on a bench who has heard every lie, seen every performance. Ilara believes she's the smartest person in any room. And soon, she'll walk into a room designed to humble the arrogant. A room presided over by Judge William Hawthorne. The pre-trial games are over. The main event is about to begin. There's no sound in the world quite like a courtroom going silent when the judge enters. It's not a peaceful quiet. It's a held breath. 100 people deciding not to move, not to cough, not to rustle a paper. It's the sound of authority. And Judge William Hawthorne commanded that silence just by walking in. He was a tall man, with a face that seemed carved from old, weathered wood. His black robe wasn't just clothing, it was a territory. His bench was the border. On one side, order. On the other, chaos, waiting to be explained. The gallery was packed. Reporters with sharpened pencils. Courtroom artists with quick, sweeping hands. Neighbors. Curiosity seekers. And in the front row, alone, David Ridgway, looking like he hadn't slept in months. The prosecution table was orderly. Neat stacks of binders. The lead prosecutor, Amanda Finch, was all crisp lines and contained energy. She looked like a scalpel waiting to be used. The defense table was simpler. Robert Lyman, the legal mechanic, with a single, thick notebook. And beside him, Ilara. She was wearing a simple, navy blue dress. It was chosen to make her look young, soft. Her hair was down, brushed to a smooth, shiny curtain. She sat with perfect posture, her hands folded in her lap. She looked like a respectful student in the principal's office. Not a defendant in a murder trial. But her eyes were everywhere. They calmly scanned the room, the jury box, the judge, the spectators. She was mapping it, learning its acoustics. This was her new stage. Judge Hawthorne's voice filled the silence, deep and dry as old parchment. This court is now in session. Are the parties ready? The state is ready, Your Honor, said Finch. The defense is ready, Lyman murmured. Proceed with opening statements. Amanda Finch stood and walked to the space before the jury box. She didn't smile. She just looked at them, 12 ordinary people, and began to tell them a story. This is a story about a mask, she said, her voice clear and cold. The mask of a perfect daughter. A brilliant student. A talented musician. 4 years, Sarah Vance saw only that mask. She loved the girl behind it. But on December 17th, the mask slipped. And what was revealed wasn't a child. It was a calculator. A planner. A killer. She walked them through it. Not with emotion, but with facts, laid out like bricks. The digital ghost. The journal's hidden ledger. The staged scene. The financial motive. She didn't pull the trigger in a moment of rage, Finch said, turning to point a steady finger at Ilara. She pulled it as the final step in a months-long project. She called it Operation Cicada. A creature that hides for years, then emerges. Well, the emergence was a gunshot. And the shell she left behind is the girl sitting right there, still pretending to be the victim in her own horror story. Ilara didn't flinch. She listened, her face a mask of polite attention, as if hearing a mildly interesting lecture. Then it was Robert Lyman's turn. He didn't stride. He shuffled to the same spot. He looked at the jury not as an orator, but as a tired neighbor sharing an unfortunate truth. "The prosecution has told you a story about a monster," he began, his voice raspy. "It's a compelling story. It's also a fiction. What they call planning, we call a traumatized child spiral. A brilliant mind, buckling under the unbearable pressure of perfection. The searches? The notes?" A cry for help in a language she thought no one would understand. The tragedy isn't that Ilara Vance is a killer. The tragedy is that a child screaming in the only way she knew how was met not with help, but with handcuffs. He painted a different picture. Of a distant, demanding mother. Of a home colder than any crime scene. He took the prosecution's bricks of evidence and called them rubble. Misinterpreted, out of context, the desperate constructions of a system that needed a villain. 2 stories. 1 room. The jury's eyes flicked between the prosecutor, the defender, and the small, still girl in blue. When the statements were done, Judge Hawthorne turned to the first order of business. Jury selection had already happened, but he gave them their final charge. His gaze swept over them. "You are the sole judges of the facts," he said, and his eyes seemed to linger on Ilara for a half-second longer than necessary. "You must decide which story holds truth. Not the most dramatic story. Not the most comforting story. The true story. That is your burden." The first witness was called the 911 operator. The recording was played in the silent court. Ilara's shattered, childlike voice filled the room. "My mom. Please, there's blood." Several jurors wiped their eyes. One looked at Ilara with profound pity. Ilara, listening to her own performance, simply lowered her gaze to her folded hands, the picture of painful remembrance. She was playing the room perfectly, feeding each story exactly what it wanted. The prosecution saw cold calculation. The defense and the jury saw a broken child. Only one person in the room seemed utterly unconvinced by either performance. Judge Hawthorne. He watched her with the weary, focused attention of a hawk watching a mouse that thinks it's hidden. He saw the too perfect stillness. The lack of a single, genuine tremor. He saw the mask. And he was waiting for the moment it would crack. The dot hovered on a spot inside the dining room, just past the archway. The exact spot where Ilara had stood that night. A juror shifted in their seat. Another stared, lips parted. Robert Lyman stood for cross-examination. He didn't challenge the science. You can't. Instead, he tried to cloud its meaning. "Dr. Vancek, could an intruder have stood in that exact spot?" "It's physically possible," she conceded. "And these droplets, could they have been transferred? By a shoe, perhaps, after the fact. The patterns are consistent with direct airborne deposition, not transfer. The physics are very specific." Lyman sat down. He'd created a wisp of doubt, but the picture on the screen was stubborn. It placed the killer in the room, not fleeing through it. Then came the audio expert. He played the 911 call again. But this time, he filtered it. He removed Ilara's voice, amplifying the background. In the 2 seconds of dead air after the dial tone, before she spoke, there was a sound no one had noticed. A faint, rhythmic drip drip drip. "That is the sound of water falling onto a hard surface at a consistent rate," the audio expert said. "I compared it to a recording made by the first responder's body camera of water dripping from the eaves outside the open patio door. It's a match." Finch stood up. "What does that tell us, in your expert opinion?" "It tells us that when Miss Vance dialed 911, the patio door was already open. The crime scene was already established. The break-in had already happened. She didn't call in panic upon discovering a scene. She called from within a scene she already knew was there. The science was a silent, relentless tide, washing away the sandcastle of Alara's story. The gunshot residue analysis came next. Microscopic particles found only in the crevices of the gun's grip and trigger, the places a thorough wiping might miss. And those particles matched a sample taken from Alara's right hand, swabbed at the hospital. Lyman fought back. Could those particles have gotten on her hand when she stumbled, when she found the body, perhaps touching the gun in her shock? The forensic chemist was polite but firm. The distribution pattern is inconsistent with a passive, accidental transfer. It's consistent with the forceful, compressive grip of firing the weapon. Each scientific witness was like a pin being driven into a map, and all the pins pointed to the same small spot, the girl in the blue dress. Alara's composure began to show its first hairline fracture. It wasn't a dramatic crack. It was a subtle shift. The perfectly still hands in her lap developed a slight tremble. Not the shake of fear, but the fine vibration of intense, suppressed rage. Her gaze, which had been serenely scanning the room, now fixed on the witnesses with a cold, laser focus. She was no longer observing a game. She was watching her perfect machine being dismantled by people she considered mechanics. She had planned for human error, for emotional misreads. She hadn't planned for the indifferent testimony of physics and chemistry. You can't argue with a blood droplet. You can't charm a sound wave. The final scientific witness was the digital analyst, Ben Carter. He explained the VPN, the kill switch, the phantom ping to the vault named Operation Cicada. He called her digital hygiene, meticulous and paranoid. In your years of experience, Finch asked, have you ever seen a 14-year-old employ this level of operational digital security? Ben looked almost apologetic as he answered, no. I've only seen it in espionage cases and organized cybercrime. The word espionage hung in the air. As Ben left the stand, the courtroom was hushed. The story of a grieving daughter, of a confused child, of an intruder in the night. It lay in pieces on the floor, dissected by the unfeeling tools of science. The only story left standing was the one told by the blood spatter, the gunshot residue, and the digital ghost. And that story had a single, unmistakable author. Alara looked down at her own hands, as if seeing the invisible GSR particles for the first time. The tremor stopped. Her fists clenched, just once, so tight her knuckles turned white. Then she released them, smoothed her dress, and lifted her chin. The mask was still on. But for the first time, you could see the strain of holding it in place against the weight of the truth. So there it is. The moment when stories collide with facts. When a brilliant narrative meets an immovable object. We can convince ourselves of anything. We can build entire worlds inside our heads. But the real world has rules. Gravity, physics, chemistry. And those rules don't care how smart you are. They just are. Alara built the perfect lie. But she built it in a world that obeys perfect, unforgiving laws. And those laws just testified against her. The battle isn't over. But the terrain has shifted. From the realm of emotion and manipulation to the hard, cold ground of evidence. And on that ground, her arrogance is starting to look like what it always was, a terrible, tragic flaw. There are some sounds you can't stage. The guttural, ugly cry of real grief is one of them. It doesn't sound beautiful. It sounds like something breaking. Mrs. Eleanor Gable, Sarah Vance's next-door neighbor for 15 years, made that sound on the witness stand. She was a kind, grandmotherly woman who'd watched Alara grow up, who'd traded gardening tips with Sarah over the fence. The prosecution called her not for evidence, but for heartbreak. Amanda Finch's voice was soft. Mrs. Gable, can you tell us about Sarah? The woman clutched a wad of tissues, her knuckles white. She was a light, she whispered, her voice trembling. She worked so hard. But she loved that girl. She loved her so much it was almost a pain to watch. She wanted to give Alara everything. Every chance she never had. And Alara? What was she like as a child? A sad, fond smile broke through. Quiet. Always so serious. But Sarah would tell me about her little triumphs. The first time she rode a bike. The first perfect score. Sarah's voice would just shine. Mrs. Gable's smile dissolved. The last year or so, Sarah got quieter too. Worried, I thought. About work. I'd ask and she'd just say, "It's nothing, Ellie. Just teenage stuff." But she looked tired. Not like herself. Finch let the silence sit for a moment. "Did you see them the day before Sarah died?" Mrs. Gable nodded, fresh tears falling. They were in the driveway. Sarah was trying to put a suitcase in the trunk. Elara was just standing there, watching. Sarah was laughing, saying she was terrible at packing. She turned to Elara and said, "Help your old mom, will you?" And Elara. She just took the suitcase, placed it perfectly in the trunk, and closed it. Then she looked at Sarah and said, "You have to be more efficient." No smile. Just a correction. Sarah's laugh just died. She looked so small in that moment. I turned away. It felt private. A mother's hurt. The entire courtroom felt that hurt. It was a tiny, devastating snapshot of the coldness that had lived in the house on Magnolia Lane. "Thank you, Mrs. Gable," Finch said gently. No further questions. Robert Lyman stood. He had a terrible job to do. He had to cross-examine a weeping grandmother. He kept it brief, almost apologetic. "Mrs. Gable, you never witnessed any violence, any abuse, correct?" "No, never," she sobbed. "Just normal family tensions, perhaps magnified by stress?" I suppose. Thank you." He sat down quickly. He'd done the minimum. But the emotional atmosphere in the room was now thick, heavy with a specific aching sorrow for Sarah. The judge called for a short recess. As people stirred, as the jury filed out looking shell-shocked, the cameras in the media row remained fixed on Elara. They were waiting for a reaction. A tear. A look of shared sorrow. Anything to show she felt the weight of what had just been described. Elara leaned over to whisper to Robert Lyman, her back to the gallery. Her face was partly obscured. A courtroom artist, quick as a snake, captured the profile. And in that moment, as she pulled back from her lawyer, something flashed across her face. It was there and gone in less than a second. A faint, subtle curl of her lip. Not a full smile. A smirk. A tiny, contemptuous twist of satisfaction. It was the look of a chess player who's just heard an opponent explain a naive, foolish strategy. It was the look she'd given David over dinner. The look of assessment, of superiority. The artist's pencil flew. Sketch, sketch, shade. A photographer with a long lens, hidden in the back, fired off a silent, rapid burst. Elara smoothed her face back into neutral, composed attentiveness. She hadn't seen them. She was too focused on the game in front of her, not the gallery around her. But the world saw. During the 15-minute recess, the image exploded. The artist's sketch, raw, emotional, capturing that chilling twist of the mouth, was scanned and tweeted. The photo, grainy but unmistakable, followed. The headline wrote itself. Smirking killer? The caption, accused teen shows contempt as neighbor sobs over mother's memory. By the time the bailiff called the court back to order, the image was viral. It was on every news channel, every social media feed. The narrative the public had held, the complex, tragic, maybe abused girl, shattered in an instant. In the courtroom, the air had changed. The jurors returned. They'd been in their private room, but some had phones, some had seen the buzz. They looked at Elara differently now. The pity in their eyes had hardened into something colder. Distrust. Revulsion. Judge Hawthorne entered. He settled onto the bench. His ancient eyes swept the room, and they seemed to pause on the press row, where the frantic energy of a breaking story hummed. He knew. He understood what had just happened. He looked down at Elara. His gaze was not angry. It was final. It was the look a collector gives a specimen after it's been correctly identified. Elara, still unaware of the firestorm outside, felt the shift. She saw the jurors' changed faces. She saw the prosecutor standing a little taller. A flicker of confusion crossed her eyes. What changed? Then, Robert Lyman, looking pale, slid his phone briefly toward her under the table. On the screen was the news site, her own smirking face staring back. Her perfect composure froze. For one endless, horrible second, her mask didn't just crack, it vanished. Her eyes widened with pure, uncalculated panic. She looked, for the first time, like exactly what she was, a 14-year-old girl who had just made a catastrophic, public mistake. She snatched her eyes away, fixing them straight ahead on the judge's bench, her face now a rigid, bloodless mask of control. But it was too late. The world had seen behind the curtain. The smile heard round the world hadn't just been seen. It had been understood. It was the arrogant monster, peeking out for a flash, and confirming everyone's deepest, darkest suspicion. Think about that. A lifetime of careful performance, months of meticulous planning, weeks of flawless in-court behavior. All undone by a single, unguarded second. A reflex of contempt she couldn't control. It's the fatal flaw of the arrogant monster. They can't help but admire their own work. They can't help but feel superior. And eventually, that feeling leaks out. The courtroom is no longer a stage for a complex drama. It's become a lens, focusing the harsh, unforgiving light of public judgment on one simple fact. A girl who smirks when her mother's friend weeps is not a victim. She's something else entirely. And now, everyone knows it. You know that sound when a machine starts to grind? When the gears, once so smooth, catch on something. That metallic, protesting whine. That was the sound of Alara Vance's defense, right there in the courtroom. The smirk had changed everything. It was the crack in the dam. And now, the pressure of the truth began to pour through. It started with the financial expert. A dry, bespectacled man named Arthur Peel who spoke about life insurance policies and trust funds like they were poetry. He testified that Sarah Vance had a $750,000 life insurance policy, with Alara as the sole beneficiary. He explained that Sarah's will left everything, the house, her investments, in a trust for Alara, accessible when she turned 25. And if Miss Vance were to be convicted and incarcerated as a juvenile? Prosecutor Finch asked. The assets would remain in trust, managed by a court-appointed guardian, until her release or her 25th birthday, Peel said. So, immediate freedom wasn't the financial goal. But control of the assets upon adulthood was. Objection, calls for speculation, Lyman said, but his heart wasn't in it. Sustained, Judge Hawthorne rumbled, but the seed was planted. The jury saw it, a brilliant girl who couldn't wait 11 years. Who couldn't risk her mother marrying David, having another child, changing the will. It wasn't just money. It was a kingdom. And Alara wanted the throne now. Then, the prosecution called Dr. Lillian Evans, the therapist. Robert Lyman objected violently. Therapist-patient privilege, Your Honor. Amanda Finch was ready. We have an exception, Your Honor. The defendant waived privilege when she put her mental state at issue by suggesting diminished capacity. Her communications are now relevant to show premeditation, not emotional distress. Judge Hawthorne's eyes were like flint. Overruled. The witness will answer the questions. Dr. Evans took the stand, looking pale but resolved. She confirmed what she'd told Miller. Alara's sessions were a calculated performance, a blueprint for a victim narrative. She recited the damning quote, "I'm just thinking about endings. How some endings look like accidents, even when they're not." But it was under Finch's sharp questioning that the true collapse happened. Doctor, based on your notes and your expertise, did Alara Vance ever display genuine, uncontrolled emotion in your sessions? Grief, rage, fear. Dr. Evans paused, her professional composure finally breaking with a look of profound sadness. No. Her emotional presentation was always curated. It served the narrative of the quiet, psychological victim. Real trauma is messy. It contradicts itself. Alara's story was always coherent. Always on brand. The word hung in the air. On brand. A product. A story. Lyman, on cross, tried desperately to salvage it. Doctor, isn't a lack of expressed emotion also a symptom of profound trauma? Detachment. It can be, Evans conceded. But in true detachment, the patient isn't crafting a compelling alternative story. They are absent. Ilara was never absent. She was constructing. It was a death blow. The defense's entire foundation, that Ilara was a fractured, abused child, was dismantled by the very person hired to heal her. Back at the defense table, Ilara's icy control was boiling away into something hot and dangerous. She scribbled furious notes on a legal pad and shoved them at Lyman. He would glance at them, his jaw tightening, and often ignore her suggestions. During a sidebar conference at the judge's bench, the final thread snapped. The lawyers were huddled, arguing a point of law. The jury couldn't hear. But the microphones picked it up. Ilara, thinking she was unheard, leaned toward her lawyer and hissed, her voice a venomous whisper that echoed slightly in the quiet room. "You're letting them do this. That financial idiot is wrong. The trust has a clause about emancipation. Challenge him on the clause. Are you even trying?" Robert Lyman didn't turn around. His shoulders stiffened. But Judge Hawthorne's head slowly turned. His eyes, cold and disapproving, locked not on Lyman, but on Ilara. The sidebar ended. Lyman returned to the table, his face ashen. He didn't look at her. He stared straight ahead, a man who had just realized he wasn't defending a client. He was being commanded by one. And she was commanding him to lose. The rest of the day was a slow-motion avalanche. Lyman's objections grew weaker. His cross-examinations became perfunctory. He was a lawyer who had lost faith in his case, and more importantly, in his client. The arrogant monster had made a fatal error. She had revealed her contempt not just for the victim, not just for the court, but for her own champion. She had shown him he was just another tool, and a blunt one at that. And tools can break. Or they can be set down. As court adjourned for the day, the bailiff came to escort Ilara out. She turned to Lyman, her eyes blazing with cold fury. "We need to talk. Tonight. You need a new strategy." Robert Lyman finally looked at her. He carefully closed his binder, placed his pen in his briefcase, and stood up. "No," he said, the word quiet but absolute. "You need a new lawyer." And he walked away, leaving her standing at the table, utterly alone in the crowded, whispering courtroom. The defense hadn't just crumbled. Its architect had just fired the foreman. Let that sink in. When you treat everyone as a pawn, eventually the board empties. You're left alone with your brilliant, perfect strategy, and no one left to move the pieces. Ilara believed her intelligence gave her authority over everything. The evidence, the narrative, the law, her lawyer. But there are things you can't outsmart. Like human dignity. Like professional pride. Like the simple, weary refusal to be manipulated for one more second. Her house of cards didn't. There's a moment in every trial, if you watch closely, when power shifts. It's not when the verdict is read. It's earlier. It's a silent, tectonic slide. And it almost always starts with the judge. With Robert Lyman gone, the court appointed a new defense attorney for Ilara, a young, nervous woman named Chloe Abrams, who looked at the mountain of evidence and the infamous client and seemed on the verge of fainting. The strategy was now pure damage control. Beg for mercy. But Judge William Hawthorne had watched this entire spectacle like a botanist studying a rare, poisonous flower. He'd seen the smirk. He'd heard the hissed command to her lawyer. He'd observed the cold, analytical eyes scanning the room as if it were a puzzle she owned. And he decided it was time to change the game. It happened during what should have been a routine hearing on motions. The new attorney, Chloe, was arguing to limit the scope of the financial motive testimony. She was doing a decent, technical job. Judge Hawthorne listened, then steepled his fingers. "Counselor," he said, his voice like gravel, "your client's state of mind is the core of this case. The prosecution argues for cold, calculating premeditation. You argue for a distorted, pressured psyche. Yet we have heard remarkably little from the person who best knows that mind, the defendant herself." He let that hang in the air. Chloe stammered. "Your Honor, the defense does not believe it's in my client's best interest to—" "I am not asking the defense," Hawthorne interrupted, not unkindly, but with absolute finality. His eyes shifted to Elara. "I am asking the defendant. Miss Vance, you have an extraordinary intellect. That is not in dispute. This court is struggling with a question of purpose, of reason." He leaned forward slightly, his gaze locking onto hers. It wasn't an angry look. It was curious, intellectual. It was the first look anyone had given her in months that mirrored her own, a look of pure, unemotional assessment. "You have listened to experts dissect your digital footprints, your journals, the physics of blood. They speak about you. But they cannot speak for the why. Only you can." He paused. "I am considering a motion to have you take the stand. Not for the prosecution to cross-examine. Not for your defense to direct. For me to inquire. To understand the mind behind the machine." The courtroom buzzed. This was highly unusual. Amanda Finch looked startled, then calculating. Chloe Abrams looked terrified. But Elara's eyes lit up. This was the gambit. Judge Hawthorne had dangled the one thing she couldn't resist, an invitation to perform on the ultimate stage, to explain her masterpiece to the one person in the room she might see as a potential peer. To outsmart the system not from the defense table, but from the witness box, under the direct, respectful gaze of its highest authority. It was a chance to transform from defendant to lecturer, from criminal to genius. He was speaking her language. He was treating her not as a child, but as a formidable mind. It was the ultimate validation. "Your Honor," Chloe whispered urgently, "I must advise my client strongly against this." "I'll do it." Elara's voice cut through the murmur. "Clear. Come." "Certain." "Elara, no," Chloe pleaded. But Elara wasn't looking at her lawyer. She was looking at Judge Hawthorne, and in her eyes was a spark of something like gratitude. Finally, someone who understood that this was about intellect, not crime. Finally, a worthy interlocutor. The judge gave a slow, single nod. "Very well. We will proceed after lunch. The defendant will take the stand for a court inquiry." That hour for lunch was the longest of Elara's life. Not with fear. With anticipation. She practiced her answers in her head. She would be poised, logical, devastatingly articulate. She would explain the pressures, the silent prison of perfectionism, not as an excuse, but as a premise. She would reframe Operation Cicada not as a murder plot, but as a psychological coping mechanism gone horrifically wrong, a metaphor for emergence that a literal, linear world had tragically misunderstood. She would meet his intellect with her own, and in doing so, force him to see the tragedy as she did, a systemic failure to understand a superior mind. When she was sworn in and sat in the witness box, the courtroom was electric. She smoothed her dress. She looked at Judge Hawthorne, ready for the duel. He began gently, almost like a professor. "Miss Vance, you are clearly a person who values precision, planning, foresight. The prosecution has shown us the results of that foresight. Can you explain to me, in your own words, what you were building toward with all this preparation?" It was the perfect opening. And Elara took it. She spoke for 20 minutes without interruption. She was mesmerizing. She described the architecture of expectation that boxed her in. She talked about the data set of parental disappointment. She used terms like asymmetric emotional warfare and the prison of potential. It was a breathtaking performance of intellectualized self-justification. She never admitted to murder. She simply explained the environment that made an emergence necessary. She was painting her crime as a tragic theorem. The jury looked confused. The prosecutors looked furious. But Judge Hawthorne listened. He nodded occasionally. He never looked away. When she finished, there was a stunned silence. She had done it. She had controlled the narrative from the witness box. Then Judge Hawthorne asked his second question. His voice was still calm, still curious. "A brilliant explanation, Miss Vance. Thank you. It leads me to one final point of confusion, which perhaps you can clarify." He picked up a single sheet of paper, the log from the digital analyst showing the VPN kill switch ping to the vault lock server. You have described a psyche under unbearable, silent pressure. A mind seeking a desperate way out. Yet on the night of December 17th, at 10:05 p.m., while experiencing this profound distress, you engaged a military-grade VPN. You connected to an encrypted vault. This is not the act of a person in emotional crisis. This is the act of a person executing a protocol. He set the paper down. His eyes never left hers. The kindly professor was gone. In his place was the hunter who had finally cornered his prey. "So, for the sake of my understanding," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper that everyone strained to hear. "At the moment you were allegedly suffering this breaking point, did you remember to activate the VPN before or after you felt the overwhelming emotional distress that compelled you to emerge?" The trap sprung. The question was unanswerable. It exposed the fatal crack between her two stories, the emotional victim and the cold operator. In her rehearsed speech, she had lived in the world of emotion. But the VPN log lived in the world of cold, technical protocol. They could not occupy the same moment. Her brilliant, poised face went blank. The words died in her throat. Her eyes, which had been so focused on his, flickered away for the first time, down to her hands, to the damning paper on his bench, anywhere but at him. She saw the architecture of her own lie, and he had just pointed out where the load-bearing beam was missing. She didn't speak. The silence stretched, thick and choking. Judge Hawthorne didn't press. He didn't need to. He simply nodded, as if she had answered. As if the blank terror on her face was the only answer the court required. "No further questions," he said quietly. He had gambled that her arrogance would lure her onto the stand. And he had gambled that her own brilliant, bifurcated mind would be unable to reconcile its two halves under the simplest light of logic. He was right. On both counts. As the bailiff helped a suddenly unsteady Alara back to her seat, the arrogant monster was gone. In her place was just a girl who had finally, truly been seen. And understood. No more experts. No more objections. No more strategies. The jury had returned their verdict, guilty of murder in the first degree. The only thing left in the whole weary world was the sentence. The courtroom felt different. The circus had left town. The gallery was half empty. The reporters looked bored, waiting for the headline number. The only people who mattered were the ones in the well of the court. Alara Vance sat at the defense table, wearing that same simple blue dress from the first day. Her new lawyer, Chloe, sat beside her, looking down at her notes as if they were written in a language she didn't understand. The air was thick with finished things. The bailiff spoke. "All rise." Judge William Hawthorne entered, his robe flowing behind him like a shadow. He didn't look at the gallery. He didn't look at the lawyers. His eyes went straight to Alara, and stayed there as he sat down. "Be seated," he said. He shuffled some papers. The sound was like dry leaves in the quiet. "This is the part," he began, his voice low and measured, "where I am supposed to consider the factors. The youth of the defendant. The possibility of rehabilitation. The nature of the crime." He paused, taking off his glasses and setting them carefully on the bench. "But we are far beyond factors, aren't we?" He looked at Alara, and it felt like the first time anyone had truly seen her. "Miss Vance, you have presented this court with two people. The first is the one your lawyer wants me to see. A child. A victim of circumstance and pressure. A brilliant mind bent by forces it couldn't control." He leaned forward, his hands folded. "The second is the one the evidence shows. The architect. The planner. The ghost in the machine. A mind so convinced of its own superiority that it believed it could script reality itself, and that the rest of us would simply play our assigned parts." Ilara's face was a perfect, polite mask, but her eyes were fixed on his, unblinking. She was waiting for him to finish so she could categorize his speech, file it away. She was still in her machine. "The tragedy," Judge Hawthorne continued, "is that you are both. The brilliant child and the arrogant monster are the same person. And the monster ate the child." A flicker in her eyes. A micro-expression of annoyance. Sentimentality, she was probably thinking. You researched everything. Ballistics, forensics, juvenile law. You studied how to look like a victim. You wrote the role and then you performed it, for your therapist, for the police, for this jury. He picked up the pink journal. You even wrote your own stage directions in the margins of your fake pain. He put it down with a soft thud. But you forgot to research one thing. The weight of a human life. Not as a concept, not as an obstacle in a plan, but as a presence, a history, a future. The sound of a laugh in a kitchen, the worry in a mother's eyes, even if you mistook it for criticism. You can't find that in a search engine. You can't encrypt it in a vault. And you can't simulate it in a performance. He was speaking directly to her now, conversationally, as if they were the only two people in the universe. You believed your intelligence placed you above the moral universe. That rules were for slower, softer people. That you could opt out of cause and effect. That is the oldest, saddest lie of the brilliant and the damned. And it always ends the same way. Alone in a room, listening to the echo of a choice that can't be unmade. He put his glasses back on. The formal judge returned. Elara Vance, it is the judgment of this court that you be committed to the Washington State Department of Children, Youth, and Families for a maximum term, to be held in a secure juvenile rehabilitation facility until your 21st birthday. He read the formal language, the dates, the conditions. But no one heard it. They were all waiting. Because Elara's mask had finally settled back into place. The polite, listening face. The performance wasn't over. She had lost the game, but she could still win the moment. She could show no reaction. She could prove her superiority by being unmoved by his sermon, by the sentence. She could be ice where he expected fire. As he finished speaking, she did it. The same, faint, triumphant curl of the lip. The ghost of the smirk. The final, defiant flicker of the arrogant monster, assuring herself, I am still smarter than you. Your rules don't touch me. Judge Hawthorne saw it. He'd been waiting for it. He didn't react with anger. He didn't bang his gavel. He simply leaned forward again, his voice dropping to a register so quiet, so personal, it felt like a thought spoken aloud in the silent room. I see you, Elara. 4 words. The same 4 words from the first day. But this time, they didn't just wipe the smile away. They shattered the mask. Her face didn't just go blank. It collapsed. The cool, calculated composure crumbled into something raw and unformed. Her eyes widened, not with fear, but with a horrifying, dawning understanding. He hadn't been fooled. Not for a second. Not the first smile, not the tears, not the brilliant testimony. He had seen her. The real her. The lonely, monstrous, arrogant her. And he had been watching her the whole time, seeing every layer of the performance, and seeing the ugly truth beneath every one. And in seeing her, he had condemned not the character she played, but the architect who built it. A sound escaped her. Not a sob, but a short, sharp gasp, as if all the air had been punched from her lungs. The color drained from her face completely. For the first time since this began, she looked like exactly what she was. A terrified 14-year-old girl who had done something unforgivable and had nowhere, and no one, to hide behind. The arrogant monster was gone. Exorcised by 4 quiet words. The gavel fell. This court is adjourned. So, where does a story like this end? It doesn't, really. It just becomes a different, quieter story. Elara Vance was sent to the Green Hill Secure Juvenile Rehabilitation Facility. It's not a prison. It's a collection of low, beige buildings surrounded by fir trees and razor wire disguised as something less harsh. They have classes there. Therapy. They try to fix what's broken. Her case manager reports that she is a model resident. Polite. Studious. She has earned her high school diploma already and is taking college correspondence courses in psychology and legal studies. Of course she is. The staff notes say she is highly intelligent but difficult to engage on an emotional level. She has no friends among the other residents. They're afraid of her. The story of the smirking girl who shot her mom is legend in the places where such legends grow. Detective Adrian Miller retired 6 months after the trial. He told his wife he was tired of looking at monsters. He took up woodworking in his garage. He tries to make things that fit together cleanly, with obvious purpose. He rarely talks about the Vance case. But sometimes in the middle of the night, he'll wake up and see that smile, the one from the hallway, the one that asked, "Which one of you messed up?" And he'll understand that some people are just born with a piece missing. And you can't investigate that. You can only contain it. David Ridgway moved to Portland. He changed his name. He doesn't teach history anymore. The past, for him, is not a safe place to dwell. He lives in a small apartment with a dog, and he takes long, quiet walks. He still loves Sarah Vance. And in his darker moments, he wonders if Alara's greatest crime wasn't taking a life, but making everyone who loved her mother doubt what was real. And Judge William Hawthorne? He still sits on the bench. He hears cases every day. But those who work with him say he pauses a little longer now before pronouncing sentence. He looks at the defendants, especially the young ones, with a deeper, sadder scrutiny, as if he's looking for a ghost behind their eyes. The ghost of a girl who thought she was a god. He never mentions her. But his legacy, in legal circles, will always be tied to one thing: the 4 words that broke the perfect performance. I see you, Ilara. As for Ilara herself, she sits in her room, which is, of course, impeccably ordered. She reads. She writes. She thinks. Does she feel remorse? The therapist's reports are inconclusive. She can articulate the concept of remorse perfectly. She understands the social and moral utility of it. But when asked if she feels it, she gives a curious, analytical answer. Regret is a cognitive function. Grief is an emotional one. I can engage the former. The latter seems biologically inaccessible to me. She has reframed her entire story. In her mind, she is no longer a criminal. She is a pioneer. A mind too advanced for the primitive systems of family and emotion. She is an astronaut of the psyche, stranded in a world of gravity-bound creatures. Her sentence isn't punishment. It's a mandatory research period. The arrogant monster wasn't destroyed. It was just given a smaller room. And in that room, it's still the smartest thing there. It's still writing the story. So we're left with the question that started it all, the one that hangs in the air after the gavel falls and the lights go out. Was she born this way? A cold seed planted in a warm womb? Or was she made? Sculpted by silence, by pressure, by a loneliness so profound it froze her from the inside out? The truth is probably both. And that's the most terrifying part. That the line between a genius and a monster isn't a line at all. It's a shadow. And it can grow in the most perfect-looking houses, under the most careful watch, until one day, it steps into the light and smiles. This story ends in a quiet room, with a mind that is still calculating. It leaves us with a chill, and a question we can't quite answer. If this tale of a perfect crime and an imperfect soul got under your skin, if it made you think about the monsters that wear familiar faces, then you need to subscribe. Hit that button and ring the bell. Because next time, the story is even closer to home. We're going deep into the case of a man who recorded his own nightmares, and the police found his camera in the one place it couldn't possibly be. It's called He Recorded His Sleepwalking, but the video shows him leaving the house. Subscribe now. The dark is waiting, and the next story begins in just a few days.